Thanks, everyone. Hope you're having a good conference. Appreciate everybody attending under different circumstances. I realize the gravity of the situation that's ahead of us, but importantly, we still have jobs to do, and I appreciate everybody coming here to talk about threat hunting and where we see that moving forward. The introduction that we went through, just give you that quick background again. So I lead the sales engineering team for the West at Exabeam now. We're a next generation SIM provider that does UEBA. What I'm going to be talking about mostly is how I used to do threat hunting in SIMs, and where a lot of customers I still speak to are doing threat hunting today. So I used to do triaging alerts and threat hunting as an analyst. I worked in Splunk, IBM QRadar, RSA, Security Analytics, McAfee Nitro, and Elastic. So those were the SIMs we operationalized in a managed service provider, drowned in alerts. And then I moved into the SIM engineer position where I started helping write the rules. I managed threat intelligence integrations to bring IOCs into SIM products, and also wrote playbooks for analysts of how to effectively leverage threat hunting techniques. So that's where I came from, and then I left the SIM space because, quite frankly, I felt that it was overpromised, underdelivered. They were sold as put everything in a bucket and the important stuff will bubble to the top, but really it was a developmental platform that was very difficult for most customers to operationalize. Only really the Fortune 500 and 100 had the resources to really make those work. So that made me leave for a long time. Now I'm back, but less about where I'm at, and let's talk about IOCs. The agenda, I'm going to talk about what are IOCs, how do people use them mostly, how do they apply to a kill chain, and then what I want to move into are TTPs. So tools, tactics, how are they used, how do we combine those with analytics, where do those fit in the kill chain? That's really the flow we're going to go through. So a lot of the beginning should be very familiar. I'm just going to really make you remember all the pain that we're all going through in most environments. IOCs. What are IOCs? These are indicators, they're artifacts that give you an indication that there could have been a computer intrusion. A lot of times these are simple one-line indicators, AV signatures, hashes, file names, IPs, URLs. These look familiar, right? Different types of IOCs. Some vendors call IOCs just this, IPs, hashes, registry keys. Some people are calling these observables. Other vendors will only call a combination of IOCs to be, a combination of observables to be an IOC. Either way, we're going to use MITRE ATT&CK framework's definition, which is that this is either a network or system indicator that gives you a high confidence there was an intrusion. How did the IOCs start? Where have we gone? There's a lot of debate over FIRST, so I'm not going to make any claims to what FIRST was, but one of the early IOCs was antivirus. We had malware signatures. One of the first ones that was ever virus that was ever removed in the wild by an antivirus was called the Vienna virus in 1987. Then we started seeing networking grow, and organizations wanted to monitor the ingress and egress spaces. So then we got IPX, we got frame relay, we got IP, we got ATM, and then we started using IP tables to start tracking not just what happened on the endpoint, but communication back and forth. Right? We started getting into firewalls. Then we got network intrusion, right? When IPS came out, the NIDs. Now we're not just looking at the IPs, but we're looking at correlating large volumes of traffic behavior flows to determine if there are indicators there. Then we started moving into web proxy. So now we've got application layer monitoring to determine what types of files are being transferred, what services are being used, what protocols. Now we have a whole new set of indicators. And what happened is we were logging into all of these tools separately to try and put them all together into a story. That wasn't working, so we came out with the first SIM technology. Some of the big ones out there we talked about: Splunk, IBM QRadar. We'll throw ourselves in there, Exabeam. We've got Elastic, Logarithm, Sumo Logic, Event Tracker, Microsoft Sentinel. There is a lot to pick from here. In the beginning, there was not as much. But the pitch was, it's too inefficient to log into all of those tools and look at those. And so we need to put everything together into a single platform where analysts can do threat hunting and incident analysis. That was the pitch. The problem is, this doesn't work very well in practice, right? What we really ended up with is a giant bucket full of data and a search bar. That's where most customers live. So let's talk about IOCs in practice. So let's talk about one of the APT threats that's pretty widely known. APT 28 and 29, these were Fancy Bear and Cozy Bear. This was the same team that broke into the DNC emails and released those back in 2016, if you remember that highly publicized story. That was their end goal. And so what are the IOCs that were related to this threat? One of the first IOCs that we got were IPs that were used for reconnaissance, one of them being this IP listed here in red. But there was a total of 876 IPs that we at least knew about. On top of that, we knew that they sent a spear phishing email with a specific subject line. Again, a specific IOC. We know they exploited a specific vulnerability. We know they dropped malware with a specific hash. We know that they did CNC connections to a specific domain. And we know that they used that same malware to exfiltrate data from the system. And so this is what would typically get released to teams or be in the community that we would share with one another, is put these hashes in your malware, anti-malware products. Put these CNC blocks on your web proxy. Block this subject line in your email. Stop these IPs at your firewall. And that would help us with known bad, right? You can search for all of these things in your SIM if you want to look for exactly this one particular attack. And that was the way that we moved forward. The problem with this is that it's one-dimensional. This IP address that was used for scanning is used for lots of other activity. IPs are not exclusively bad or exclusively good. Anyone who has integrated any threat intelligence into their SIM or another product knows that there are very few indicators that are always worth investigating. Sometimes this happens. The FBI will call you and say, if you have any connections to this IP, you have an infection. Most of the time, though, these are just suspicious. And so what you end up with is you get all excited, you import all this threat intelligence, and then you get 1,000 alerts. And when you get the alert, you don't know, is this IP used for scanning? Was it used to send email? Is this a CNC domain? Is this hosting malware? All of these different utilizations of the IP influence how you do your investigation, but we typically don't have that context. We just have bad IP, bad host name. They're also only valid for short periods of time. This is one of the biggest problems with IOCs, is that they're valid for as long as they're valid, and the attacker can change where they're launching these attacks from at any time. And so you have a very short window to leverage it. And because of that, you either end up with a lot of false positives while you're trying to chase hundreds. There's 800 IPs just with this one attack. Imagine how many IPs are used for attacks all over the world. You end up with this monster amount of data that either comes with a ton of false positives that we all hate, or even worse, a false sense of security. I don't have these connections, so I can't possibly be breached or have a problem going on in my environment. You end up with a game of whack-a-mole. Let's say that we're trying to detect a compromise and we find that someone connected to a known bad IP address. What do most organizations do today? We wipe and rebuild, we take it off the network, we reset the password, and we move on. The problem is we didn't have the time to go back and investigate how did this happen? What was root cause? What was the impact? So we didn't have time to go and add additional IOCs before and after to continue to help us contain this threat. All we're really doing is whack-a-mole. Infection, 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 infection. Most teams are far too overwhelmed with alerts to do deep dive investigations, figure out root cause, make a big risk mitigation strategy to put all these changes into policy and procedures. And that's another big issue with this tunnel vision of looking at IOCs. Is you're just looking at one little part of the threat, and if that's what you're detecting, the attacker can change that, and the rest of the attack still goes through. Let's assume that we got a good IOC hit, and we want to pivot. We want to go do an investigation. Let's just go through one of those exercises. So here, I'm in Elasticsearch, and I'm doing a search for anyone in my organization who has hit this destination IP in the last 7 days. Search result comes back. Oh, I love it. Only one hit. It's our buddy Eric, and he used this source IP address to make the connection. So what's next for me? Okay, I'm going to go do a deeper dive, right? I'm going to be a good analyst. I'm going to go and figure out what other connections did this host make. I only know one of the bad IP addresses, but let's see where else this user made outbound connections to, and maybe I can find additional IOCs. So I'm going to expand my query. I still have destination IP, but I also want to look at anything that was sourced from Eric or anything from the source IP that he used in that one day. The problem is I got 1.4 million events back. This is what will happen when you're logging process activity, web proxy activity, you're logging firewall activity. These are very verbose logs. That includes over 600 destination IPs that he communicated with in that one day. That's impossible. So how is an analyst ever going to sort through which of those 609 are interesting? None of them are known IOCs. So how am I going to narrow this down? And I haven't even gotten to doing what did they do in their applications, or what processes did they run. All of this becomes an impossible task where we're really stuck in, this is why we're stuck in the whack-a-mole mode. We would love the idea of, I want to review what happened in DLP, my email, web apps, proxy, cloud applications, firewall, VPN. There's too much to go through. And so the way that Exabeam does this, and the way we recommend analysts sort through this noise, is a little bit differently. So instead of only relying on IOCs, we also leverage analytics and user behavior. And now we're getting closer to TTPs. So in this example, Frederick, aka Eric in this example, we see that instead of like Elastic, it just gave us the one IP. But here we see that not only did this IP address match a risky reputation feed, but it was also the first time that they've accessed an internet IP in China. It's also the first time anyone in the organization had accessed an IP in China. The difference here between analytics and SIM is that I didn't have to ask this question. In Elastic, when I saw this event, if I wanted to know if this user had ever contacted an IP in China before, I would need to go run a search. and I would have to wait for that search to run, and it would come back and it would say no. And then I would wonder, how many connections to China my organization makes. I got to go run another query. And these are the things we don't have time for. And so we've added additional risk with analytics plus known bad. And then to help you get through the 1.4 million events, we will add anomaly detection to other log sources. Like here, we have the process activity that we're telling you that this user has never run this process before, and nobody who uses Salesforce in the organization has ever used it before. So now we have additional insights. We're narrowing down what we're looking at. But why is this important? Why do we care about an IOC and an abnormal process executed? Because, and I've had customers tell me this before, I don't have data scientists, I have security analysts. I don't want to know about anomalies. I want to know about security incidents. So why? Why does analytics help us? And the reason is because it helps us get closer to the whole point of this talk. Tactics, techniques, and procedures. These describe not how the user or how the attacker is accomplishing their attack, but a high-level view. So this is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I'm positive this was covered in other parts of the conference today, but if not, it's a really popular framework that's gaining traction where it breaks down an attack into different stages. So this is like an evolution of Lockheed Martin cyber attack kill chain. Familiar with that? So initial access, execution, persistence, privilege escalation, defense evasion, credential access, discovery, lateral movement, collection, exfiltration, command and control. These are the steps of any attack that we go through, and there are a number of different techniques underneath these tactics that can be leveraged. And where we're living is focusing on really small portions of this. So when we talk about IOCs, we're talking about looking at one command and control, or we're looking at just brute force attempts instead of the entire picture. What would you do if we wanted to look at TTPs? We've already started to do this, and you probably noticed this with compliance frameworks. Let's start with persistence as one of these. Okay, we know every attacker wants persistence, and our friends on the red team do this all the time as well. So if you want to get local system account or a domain account, you may need to create an account. So an attacker might create an account to gain persistence. This is the Windows Event ID, the 4720. Okay, great. And we use compliance reports that require you to build reports of everybody who's created an account or done account management. And you find out in the last quarter that there were 1,000 account creations. What do you do with that report? Rhetorically, nothing. No one does anything. What are you going to do? Call every single admin and make them justify every single account creation? That's not going to happen. And if you do that, you'll find out quickly that they will hate you. This is the biggest issue, is that these types of activities can be malicious, but they're also run-of-the-mill admins doing their job. And that goes for a number of these different techniques. If anyone's tried to write rules around these, this is going to be cathartic for you. Brute force attacks. Has anyone ever tried a rule to say, you know what, if anyone fails to log in more than 15 times in 5 minutes, give me an alert? And then you find out that half your enterprise does that, and there's all these admins who have buried credentials and scripts that have been blasting the domain controller all day, or someone reset their password, but their phone is still synced with the wrong password and hits Exchange server all day. There's so much that looks like a brute force when it's really normal. RDP, it's used normally and by attackers. PowerShell, very powerful administrative functions, also used in several APT attacks. Account creation, we covered data compression, people zipping up files or sending large amounts of data to thumb drives or email. file transfers inside the organization, whether they're FTP or file shares or upload to SharePoint or Google Drive or Box. There are a number of legitimate and suspicious reasons for all of this to happen. And that is what makes it so hard, is that customers are writing rules for these that are 98% false positive rates and generate 100 alerts each a day, and nobody can go through them because they're all focused on each of these. If we go back to, they're focused on small tactics under here instead of what I'm going to show you later, instead of focusing on how an attack moves in general. Okay, so how do we use analytics to cut through this noise? And this doesn't have to just be product, by the way. Obviously, I'm from an analytics vendor, but as we were talking about before this call, these are also our best analysts. The ones that can stare at a group of server traffic and say, yeah, this admin does work on these servers, but never this time of day. Or this admin creates accounts, but they don't manage this group very often. They have the permission to do it, but I've never seen them do that before. That's interesting. And that's what can help us. That's one of the ways to separate. There's 100 account creations, but only one of them happened on a host that no one's ever used for account creation before. That would be a really good way to cut down the noise. Other examples. APT uses a persistence attack to add a scheduled task. Scheduled tasks are used also for legitimate activities. As a matter of fact, 99.9% of scheduled tasks in your environment are probably benign. And so what are the ways you can cut through that noise? What if it's the first time anyone's ever scheduled a task on this host? What if it's one that's unusual to run? What if it's unusual for the organization? How about when an APT downloader created a connection on port 1913 and port 81? What if we don't know the IOC for the IP address? What if we don't know the bad IP address that it's connecting to? What other ways? We can't create alerts for every connection on port 81. So what if we're just looking for machines that just now started to connect on port 81 when it's never done that before? Or it has, but it's still abnormal. You follow the gist here is that one of the ways to cut down on alerts is to use behavioral anomalies to help. But it's not the holy grail, because anomalies are also normal, if that makes sense. People do new things. Admins' jobs are to be all over the environment, doing new things, on new networks, installing new processes. Developers spin up apps on brand new IPs, and admins using PowerShell in a way they never used before because they're on a new project. There are still a tremendous number of benign reasons that anomalies occur. And honestly, that's one of the reasons why I hear from customers that they're not happy with most UEBAs, because they feel like they just got a bunch of extra alerts dumped on them. Instead, as an overview, instead of focusing on, again, IOCs in general, instead of looking for that IP, we could say, hey, we got an inbound connection from a country that's abnormal. Instead of looking for a specific subject line, we could say, this person got an email from a domain they don't communicate with. When the web shell was installed, we could notice that this process has never run from this directory before in the organization. When data was exfiltrated, we could have known that that host has never transmitted that much data to the web before. All of this can be detected without you writing rules or managing threat intelligence, which is a lot easier on a SOC. But again, you do not want an alert when you get an abnormal inbound connection from a country, or when there's an abnormal amount of data going out. These happen all of the time. The only time you want to know is when multiple stages in the kill chain have occurred. This is the premise of this talk, is that when there are multiple stages, high-level stages in a kill chain occurring, that is a much higher indicator that this is a threat. And as an example, back into Exabeam, I'm showing here that there's a Windows event that this user performs a remote logon to a host that they don't normally communicate with. It's the first time they've logged into that machine, and they're also doing it from the internet. Here, just for fun, we're showing it's from North Korea. It could be from any country, right? It's a UBA. The North Korea doesn't matter. So we've got some potential lateral movement here, moving in the environment. Then we see the user do a right-click run as and switch to their -admin account. So now we've got that high-level tactic of privilege escalation. And then we see the account creation. Again, admins create accounts all the time, who cares? But this user created an account on an asset where they've never done that before. None of these are IOCs, and none of these individual anomalies are worth looking at on their own. And because there's always an unlimited number of suspicious events to go through in any environment, we need prioritization. And I'm not talking critical, high, medium, low, because you're all probably laughing. You already have 100 critical alerts a day. And so we use a numerical risk scoring process to add additional risk to a user and rank them all on the home screen for you to go through. So this user has a score of 242, and when you drill in, you can see that there were multiple tactics that were leveraged. It's not about the individual anomalies. Nothing on the right-hand side here is an alert. This entire story is an alert. That's the big difference. And that's the struggle that I think we're all going through is, oh, someone logged into a new server. That could be lateral movement. Someone created an account. That could be persistence. Yeah, but it's probably only persistence if we have other indicators that CNC happened after that, or if we had reconnaissance beforehand, right? Knowing that there's multiple tactics, that really changes the game. So we're moving from, millions of IOCs, and we're moving to a small number of TTPs. IOCs change minute by minute. TTPs change a lot less. And we're moving away from only using signatures and correlation rules that we have to write and maintain ourselves to continuing to write correlation rules for specific scenarios, but using behavior to help us do this. Okay, so here's the problem. You're probably asking, okay, well, how do I go search for lateral movement in my sim? Right. That's the issue, is most sims are field and key and value based. Hunting on behavior is very difficult. So this is something that we take a lot of pride in, is that in Exabeam, you can search by activities, by different behavior. And so here, this threat hunter is searching for any user who has performed VPN that day. And here we see there's 3,400 users who have had a VPN connection, but we can also continue to drill down into other behaviors. So now I can filter this down to only users who have performed the account creation TTP and were VPN'd in during that same day. This is very different. Most sims, again, you're searching for events. And here we're not searching for events, we're searching for sessions. We're searching for a user's day or a host's day that contains this behavior so that we can, again, review an entire story. Because I don't want to review an event, I want to review the story of multiple TTPs. That's how I get out of this mess. Another example. So what are some indicators of data exfiltration? Well, so let's assume that even if you're not using the Exabeam sim, let's assume you have rules written that look for data exfiltration. Here I've written a giant OR condition looking for users who have transmitted an abnormal amount of data from a network zone. I've looked at people who are uploading data to webmail domains, users who have uploaded data to job search websites, who have written data to USB drives. Now, why is this more useful than a traditional SIM? Well, again, I don't get just the event back. Let's say that one of these is abnormal number of files written to a USB. In a traditional SIM, you get that one event, and then you have to go and build the whole story. Okay, what else happened that day? How many other TTPs were used? In Exabeam, we show you the number of reasons, the number of risk points that a user has generated during that same day. So instead of just getting that one event back, you get the whole story and all the TTPs and a numerical risk score associated with that. So this really helps you get through the noise by looking for, again, not just an event, but everything else that happened that day. Another example, known APT behaviors, looking for an encrypted argument and a PowerShell command, right? That might be an indicator, but unless there was a number of other suspicious activity that raised the risk score, I may not be interested. That's what's keeping us from looking at 100 encrypted PowerShell commands. We only want to know about the administrators that did that and other suspicious activity. Whether it's UEBA related, it doesn't matter. Could be a Palo Alto alert, could be a Proofpoint email alert, could be a CrowdStrike alert, it could be a correlation rule you wrote yourself, it could be threat intelligence you've integrated, it could be a custom correlation rule. You have all of this in your SIM for a reason. All of that should be contributing to this investigation. And the problem is that that's a tough story to put together, and you're usually doing that on your own. In summary here, the MITRE ATT&CK framework is really one of the attack frameworks that's taking off in popularity. We are one of the contributors to that team. We work hand in hand with them. We're a small contributor, but we believe in what they're doing. This company is full of ex-SOC and SIM admins who are working with customers still struggling with this process. We believe that this is how you get to signal from the noise. Let's get out of chasing every single potentially bad connection to IPs and hashes and start detecting attackers at all stages in an attack. And only when we see multiple indicators do we know that this is actually worth a human's time. And maybe then we can get customers to like their SIM and enjoy threat hunting. I'm not used to talking for that long without anybody interrupting me, so I hope I took enough breaths in there and left time for questions. I'd love to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
What's the tuning experience like when trying to tune a UEBA solution? Same, different from, say, traditional SIEM alerts?
It is different. So ideally, a UEBA solution should be machine learning based, which means that, let's take the brute force example. So let's say you're trying to write a rule where you're detecting users trying to break into an account. And you've written a rule that says nobody should fail to log in more than 30 times in 5 minutes. Then you find out that that rule blows up because you have admins who run scripts that fail to log into more servers than that all the time. Now you're in a tuning mode. Okay, I have to change the rule. Either I have to up the threshold or make different rules for different people. And that's something you have to do manually. In a UEBA, the machine should learn that your admin fails to log in 100 times a day all the time, and that someone in finance only does it 3 times. If their behavior changes, the rules should change with them. And so There are some times when users dramatically change their roles or go do special projects where their behavior goes off the rails, and you do need to do manual intervention. There are no sims out there with no tuning required, but it should be substantially less because the machine learning should be there to help us build those rules and models on our behalf.
What would be a TTP to accomplish this type of alerting when you don't have an exabeam scene?
Without exabeam, what I would do is I would write my own correlation rules that map to these TTPs. So let's say if we go back to one of these slides that showed the different TTPs that are available. So what I would do is label rules. Let's say that you have a lateral movement rule. So you've looked at someone who, or let's use exfiltration. So you've looked at someone who's compressing too much data. But what I would do is, if your sim allows you to categorize or label the rule with some type of categorization, you can do some of this mapping yourself. So this is, you can start tagging your own rules with, this is part of exfiltration. And then you can write another level of correlation beyond that. If you have 10 rules written for these different stages, you could be writing a correlation rule that looks for more than 2 in 24 hours or more than 3 in 48 hours. So trying to build these nested detection layers. It's a lot of effort, but that is something you could do if you had the manpower.
How do you convince leadership that ingesting tons of data to find the needles is a legitimate expenditure?
Ooh, tough one, especially when most sims are billing you by the amount of data that you are ingesting. As a sales engineer, I feel that pain on a constant basis. My whole job is to write justifications for projects and explain the technical to business leaders. And what I do is I always recommend mapping. If I bring in this log source, these are the use cases that I expect to be able to achieve. This is the detection that I'm going to gain. These are the gaps that I'm going to cover. These are the risks that I'm going to be able to mitigate to the business. Because that's where they're thinking. They're way over here. And if you're just talking about, I want to bring in Office 365 logs that are going to add 200K to my Splunk subscription, that's over their heads. And so building a table of justification of log source to use case to risk mitigation, that's the best way. And it might actually help you a lot. I have customers sometimes who think they want to bring in a log, and then they realize it only had one use case for it, and so we scrap it.
John, I think that's it, unless you have any final words. Actually, what are your final words?
My final words are, really appreciate the opportunity to come here and speak. Love talking about threat hunting. I'm super excited where the industry's going. Really excited about where MITRE ATT&CK framework can help us. So looking forward to seeing everybody next year and at the next event, talk about where we've gone from here.